Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. There we go. My watch was bothering me. Oh, happy Monday, everyone. Oh, it has been a long week. It's been 2 weeks since I've been with you. I was out of town last week, had some things to take care of, and so a lot happened. um, a lot happened. If you have not signed up for the Saturday newsletter, I highly suggest you do so. Last week's was great. It's also where I announced a bunch of stuff, like our new Plato course with Dan Sanderson on the Cameron Journal Academy. It's where I talk about my writing courses if you're following me for writing and books and literature and all that type of thing. It's also where I do weekly wrap up of the news and kind of give my own thoughts on things and whatnot and kind of where I am at in life and everything. So if you haven't gone to CameronJournal.com and signed up for the newsletter, you definitely should. Today, today was a very long day. I had some errands to run earlier in the day, and so I went and did that. And then I came home and I've mentioned this on the news hour a little bit, but in the last about 3 weeks to a month or so, I have recorded 26 episodes of the podcast. And today, I finally got them all uploaded and scheduled to all the places they have to go and all this type of thing. Looking forward to the day when I can pay someone to do that. But got all that uploaded and good to go. And it's a lot. So I have stuff booked out from now until April, early April. And they're gonna be coming out 2, sometimes 3 times a week, depending on the time. But there's lots of stuff happening, including a great relationship podcast on Friday with Mario Wisa about relationships and everything, which is perfect for Valentine's Day. It's gonna be great. There's so many just topics and different things covered, and a variety of people. Great chat. There's some very great current event stuff coming up in February over the next couple of weeks. So if you're not subscribed on any of the platforms you're watching this on, please subscribe now. So if you're on LinkedIn, make sure to follow me. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're on Facebook, like the page. Keep following me because there's a lot of really great content coming up that's really exciting. If you're on Twitter, follow me. A lot of really great content coming up. So that's really cool. I have just been all discombobulated today. I haven't even taken pills yet today. I haven't done anything. But, because I've been just so busy trying to get these videos done. And it's just been such a huge lift. I knew it was coming. I spent all weekend editing. Like, I started Friday, I edited Saturday, I edited Sunday, I uploaded them all. Fortunately, where I am, I have super fast internet for upload. So that is actually an easy part. In other locations, it's been more complicated. But in for this situation, it's been super easy, which has been which has been really nice. But then you're writing titles and descriptions and everything, and it's just. The great thing is there's just so much new content coming out. We have weekly long essays from my What the Hell is Going On collection coming. We have weekly long essays from Dan Sanderson coming right now. A book that I helped create with Dr. James Augsbury about not losing. He has weekly blogs starting this week about his journey into medicine, getting the preparation for his book launch on March 3rd, which we're really excited about. Um, just so much stuff is happening. Just a lot of stuff is happening around the Cameron Journal and the Cameron Journal Academy and everything. If you ever want to share the news hour with someone but don't know how, there's a new page on the Cameron Journal, CameronJournal.com/newshour. It has a playlist that updates with the latest version of the news hour, and it has links to all the places you can watch the news hour, including LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, all the streaming places. So CameronJournal.com/newshour is an easy way and place to share the news hour with people, and spread it around. One of the other things I've been talking about a lot lately is Cameron Journal Plus. A lot of people don't know because I haven't really talked about it. You can support the Cameron Journal directly. So if you head over to CameronJournal.com, in the main menu, you'll see CJ Plus. And that is where you can join. It's $5 a month. $5, literally $5. And you can support the work of the Cameron Journal. So if you want exclusive content, hangouts on our Discord, all this type of thing, the more of you start joining, the more that stuff will actually start doing. Because right now, there's only one person who does it, and we just talk like we just talk normally. He's a partner with us. We talk normally, so it's not that exciting yet. But if a few of you start joining, I'll start doing like after news hour hangouts, things like that are a lot of fun. Um, and so yeah, so that's all really exciting. Lots of great stuff happening. So make sure to be checking out CameronJournal.com lately. Save to the front to the homepage of your phone. There's a lot of stuff happening, lots of new content, and we have a lot of new content partners this year. So there's a lot of other stuff, not just heavy news and politics, but there's travel stuff, there's life stuff, there's money and economy stuff. There's just a lot of great things. So make sure to check that out. I have turning to kind of news and politics and not housekeeping about the Cameron Journal. Whew, I've come to a state of zen this week with the Trump administration. So right now we are in well, there's multiple threads going before we dive into the headlines. Most of whom actually are not Trump related this week. So there's some multiple threads going. We have the confirmations going. Most of the big ones are done, like Pam Bondi and Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio. All the big positions are done. But we have the Department of Education thing going. We have the Doge government efficiency, fraud, and waste thing going, which we're going to get into a little bit in the headlines. We also have sort of a coming constitutional crisis. It could be a constitutional crisis. So a lot of the stuff that the Trump administration has already done is being blocked by the courts. Now, the question is going to be, and we're going to dive into this more because I have a story about this from the New York Times. The question's going to be, how will the president and the White House and Elon Musk and company and everything actually honor a judge's orders? If they don't, we've got a major problem on our hands. That's the constitutional crisis. And I told someone that could happen as early as this week. It could happen down the road, but it could happen as early as this week. And if you have the executive branch openly flaunting the powers of the judicial branch, then we're in uncharted territory. And that is quite a big problem. And we're not a month in. But so you have Department of Education, you have government efficiency, you have the court cases about all of this, you have what's happening in Congress, you have Democrats demanding the Democratic Party do something, and they can't seem to find anything really to do about any of this stuff. And so it's yeah, I mean, it's, there's multiple threads on that going. Obviously last night at the Super Bowl, President Trump was attending the Super Bowl. That that's not a cheap situation. With extra security and everything that is required, it costs anywhere between $15 to $20 million. I saw one quote on Twitter. 15 to $20 million for the president to show up at the Super Bowl. But it was, national anthem, it was flyovers, American flags, it was the whole thing. We know that Trump at one time wanted to be an NFL owner, and actually people that don't know this, he started something called the United States Football League, and it was actually quite successful, and it was getting to the point, it was so popular that there was talk of a merger between the NFL and USFL. I don't remember how Trump screwed it up, but he did. The USFL fell apart. There was no merger sort of thing. And a lot of players, careers obviously ended there. Some people floated back over to the NFL. Yeah. So it's he's always kind of wanted that cachet. One of the things in his tax proposal is that he wants to cut out special tax breaks for sports owners, which is oddly specific. But it this so it was his chance to be the big man at the football stadium last night. And Melania was there. He paid her appearance fee, so she showed up, pressed and dressed. And obviously, for those of you who don't know, the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Kansas City Chiefs last night 40-22. They shut out Kansas City the first half of the game, which was just embarrassing. That whole thing for Kansas City was a complete disaster and a total mess. And it was honestly kind of not a fun game to watch till the second half. I was a bit bored. But it was fine. We had snacks. We were eating. It was cool. It was whatever. But if you were trying to beat a point spread or something on your sports betting, last night was not a great night for you. So so that was and all that sort of thing. But honestly, here's my point though. I've really reached a moment of zen with the Trump administration, in terms of I've not really limited my news coverage because I do the news, like, so how much can I limit, my exposure sort of thing. But I have found a way to really try not to emotionally engage with every single thing I see, and just get to a place of acceptance about all of this. This is the path we're going. This is what America voted for. And this is what's happening. I feel terribly about the programs that are ending, the research that won't occur, the people whose lives and careers are being irreparably changed by all of this. I'm heartened by the court cases just kind of saying no, 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 really no, stop now, sort of thing. But as I said before, we're headed towards a constitutional crisis. We don't know if that situation is going to hold. So, yeah, but emotionally speaking, I'm in a better place than I have been in this whole process. And I feel better and more confident about coming with you each week and covering the news as we live through this. And it's going to, yeah, it's going to be a long 4 years. It's not even been a month yet. Like, he's not been in office a whole month. And so much has happened. They flooded the zone. There's going to be many more things that happen. We have a budget discussion coming up. You know, Trump has done a very good job of keeping all attention on him, so we're not necessarily paying attention to every small thing that goes on in Congress, all this type of thing. But there's still going to be a lot happening and a lot going on. And I wrote about the whole Politico USAID, quote unquote, not funding your enemies thing, on Twitter and on the newsletter and all this type of thing. And it returns to something I've been talking about in the newsletter, and I talked about on this show, where I talked about the Blue Empire. And this idea on the right that government has been created and put in place to completely fund and subsidize the left to the detriment of everyday working Americans. That's the thesis. That couldn't be farther from the truth, but the reality is that government does give money to organizations to do good things it does not choose to do or cannot do. The government oftentimes will fund research to organizations that have a certain idea or ideology because those organizations are good at it, or they have the connections to get a hold of the grant, or it's an open grant funding thing, or it's an arts funding thing. These things are made available. Anyone can apply, sort of thing. But the language part is the part I find interesting. People define it as funding your enemy. Not fellow Americans, not colleagues, not the opposite party, enemies. That's the word they use. And as I said in the newsletter on Saturday, they don't see us as fellow citizens. They don't have any compatriotism with us. They see us as an enemy, like a foreign thing to be gotten rid of. And I find that uniquely disturbing. I'm not your enemy. I'm your fellow American. It's the same thing with this whole idea of the Blue Empire. That phrase has only come up. It keeps bumping around in my head. The Blue Empire. we're I almost want to say we're in a bit of a cold civil war. We're not shooting at each other, but we are in a fight. We are fighting. They view us as an empire, an enemy, a foreign thing to be excised or at least subjugated. And the fact that they're using the language of war, the language of diplomacy, to define all of this stuff is it's a lot. It's quite um an interesting way of defining people talking about politics, and especially in this time where you have this idea of oppression, you have this idea of um you have this idea uh of an enemy, of an empire, that you're at some kind of struggle for survival. Right before I started this show, someone was posting a video from this guy on TikTok who's known for his rants, and he was talking about extinction bursts. And it was funny because when I first wrote my essay, The Death of the White Christian Heteronormative Narrative, I wrote that in 2016, maybe 2017. And I put it in the first book, and it will be available on CameronJournal.com in the coming weeks. Um, if actually, I think it might already be on there because it was originally on CameronJournal.com. And so it is my I've had friends describe it as an extinction burst, and that never really resonated with me until very recently, when I realized, oh yeah, the lion fights hardest when death is near. They're going to fight their absolute hardest because to some degree it's kind of already over. The country has changed. We've been, and a lot of the changes, especially with demographic changes and all this type of thing, we've been talking about for years and years and years. People in Twitter talk about it in the worst, most racist way possible. But and even in polite society, we've been talking about the country is changing. It's getting browner. It's getting more multicultural. People are coming here from different places, and I think that's why you see a lot more of this blood and soil nationalism that is coming up. And it's kind of funny because even though I wrote about this so many years ago, about the initial Trump election, all this type of thing, it's still shocking to see that come to life in such an obvious way. And I mean, obviously, for the vast majority, it's not a conscious thing. This all happens at the very unconscious level. But there are a few people, a few speakers, who kind of make it more obvious and more conscious. A lot of them have large accounts on Twitter. Some of them are elected, and we're going to get to one of those stories. So before I get on too much monologuing, let me change screens, and let's turn to the headlines. So, this story, are we going to start here? No. This is a great story about being in the mobile society, but we're not going to start here. We're going to start over here. Oh, ha ha ha! This is a good story. So, this weekend, Trump has ordered Treasury Secretary Bessent to stop minting pennies. And it says here, since taking office, Trump has set his sights on big targets like Greenland, but he's also taken aim at small ones like paper straws, which he signed an order to quit pushing paper straws, and pennies. On Sunday night, Mr. Trump said he ordered the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, to stop producing new pennies, a move that he said would help reduce unnecessary government spending. Quote, let's rip the waste out of our great nation's budget, even if it's a penny at a time, he said in a post on Truth Social, adding that pennies literally cost us more than 2 cents. It's unclear whether Mr. Trump has the power to do this. It is Congress, not the Treasury or the Federal Reserve, that authorizes the manufacture of the nation's coins, according to the U.S. Mint. But he is right that pennies cost more than they're worth. For years, experts and government officials have called for eliminating the penny, whose purchasing power has fallen because of inflation, even as its production costs have risen. It cost 3.69 cents to produce and distribute a penny last year, according to the U.S. Mint's annual report. This means that, accounting for their face value, each penny made a loss of 2.69 cents. Last year, the Mint issued over 3 billion pennies, according to its annual report, at a loss of about $85.3 million. Pennies, which are often given as change but rarely spent, accounted for more than half of all the coins the Mint produced that year. There were about 250 billion pennies in circulation, or about 700 per person, in the United States last year. countries around the world have eliminated their smallest denomination coins in recent decades. In 2012, Canada stopped producing pennies, describing them as essentially a waste of time and space, and arguing that the move would save millions of dollars a year. Since then, cash transactions have been rounded to the nearest nickel after federal and provincial sales taxes are added. Australia withdrew its 1 and 2 cent coins from circulation in 1992, citing inflation and production costs. Even earlier, countries like Sweden and New Zealand stopped minting their 1 cent coins. In Australia, the elimination of those coins, quote, hasn't mattered at all, said Andrew Stokel, an honorary professor at the Australian National University Centre for Applied Macroeconomic Analysis. Say that 2 times fast. In the U.S., given how little pennies are used, the move would also likely have negligible impact on the economy, though the government would probably save some money. The movement to eliminate pennies has faced significant opposition, though. Americans for Common Sense, an advocacy group, has argued that eliminating pennies would not save money because, quote, many overhead expenses at the mint would remain and would need to be absorbed by other coins, increasing their per-unit costs. And obviously, it goes on to the end about all that. I found that story interesting. I agree with Trump. Mark that down. On February 10th, 2025, Cameron agreed with Trump. Yeah. Get rid of it. Don't need it. You know, save them if you got them because they'll be valuable one day because I don't make them anymore. But otherwise, no. We can let the penny go. Odd timing on the announcement. Sunday night. Whatever. This one. Okay, I do want to talk about Super Bowl advertising. I only watched the Super Bowl literally for the halftime show and the ads. I did laugh about the Super Bowl halftime show because it was black as hell. I'm like, it is blackety, black, 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 oh, black, 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 oh, black. And I laugh because, one, I don't think anyone really anticipated that. And two, I knew it would make MAGAs unhappy. And I was right. Matt Walsh was on Twitter complaining and all this sort of thing, and someone was saying, "Oh, the vibes have changed. This isn't Trump's America. This is the timeline of it when Kamala won." And people were also commenting on the fact that when Trump arrived at the stadium in New Orleans, he was being booed, and the networks put in canned cheers. Someone got a picture of a guy standing below Trump's booth and literally flipping him off. All this sort of thing. And so, it was an odd evening, but the halftime show was fantastic. Kendrick Lamar put in the performance of his lifetime. SZA was lovely, all this type of thing. As, you know, as Super Bowl halftime shows go, it was great, and he didn't need a lot of guests or anything like that. It was all on his own, and it was, you know, the symbolism, especially with people dancing in red, white, and blue hoodies, making the flag at one point, having sort of a yard, like a prison yard, a school yard, a high school basketball yard, all this type of thing, the different settings they had with the red X and everything. It was really great. But the ads were interesting in so much as they were incredibly, like, non-controversial. And that's something this article in the New York Times mentioned, is that it was nothing controversial, as you would expect, but also, and perhaps for associated reasons, very little creativity. It was a bad year for ads. The ones at the top of this list aren't much better than average. More spots than usual depended entirely on the appeal of a relatable celebrity who's almost certainly male. Concepts beat ideas. There was a lot of fussy, overly complicated silliness and not much in the way of simple, effective storytelling or mood setting. The many regional ads, movie and TV trailers, and house ads for Fox broadcasts are not included, and whatever that thing with Bill Murray was, it didn't count. So it has different. So he ranks ChatGPT as number 1, and it was really cool with the pixels and everything. I would agree with that. The Nike ad was okay, but it was kind of, you know, de rigueur sort of thing. The National Football League promoting girls' sports and everything and all this type of thing was you know, it was okay and everything. Snoop and Tom Brady did an end bullying, end racism ad sort of thing. The Stella Artois ad between David Beckham and his secret twin Matt Damon was cute. The Squarespace one throwing laptops at people in a 19th century village, that was incredibly funny. This was the No Reason to Hate ad that was quite interesting. The Hexclad ad with Pete Davidson, that one was okay. I think it's ranked properly here. The He Gets Us What Is Greatness ad, I would have ranked that lower because it was not inspiring at all. Is this funny? A series of lovely images of despair and connection set to Johnny Cash's rendition of Personal Jesus. How it illustrates the tagline, Jesus showed us what greatness really is, will not necessarily be clear to all viewers, but presumably if you know, you know. The Ritz commercial, this one I would have ranked higher. This was the only commercial I genuinely liked and kind of stopped to watch, especially because Aubrey Plaza is so good in it and everything. And Bad Bunny does a little cameo. I would have ranked that higher. The Science Moms was fine. The Google Pixel thing was fine. The Doritos set I would have ranked a little bit higher. Um, the Homes.com bit is still funny. I actually saw that again today on TikTok, and it was still funny and has Morgan Freeman in it, so what's not to love? The Novartis Your Attention Please ad for cancer. Meh. It belongs near the bottom. Elmo and Roger Federer's Letters of the Day. That was cute because Elmo's always fun. Um, I'm surprised the Dunkin' ad, the stock ad with the the stock cold brew coffee ad is so funny because it ends with the everyone put your clothes back on, you're not supposed to be naked, which was kind of funny. Um, Rocket about the home thing was fun, especially against Homes.com. The Michelob Ultra ad with Willem Dafoe and Catherine O'Hara was absolutely hilarious. The Nerds Gummy was kind of your typical commercial, nothing exciting there. Tubi was fine. DoorDash was fine. Bosch was cute, but only because of Antonio Banderas. Haagen-Dazs was fun because it was a Fast and Furious reference, including Vin and Letty and the whole gang. It was a lot of fun. Budweiser is really trying to get people back with Budweiser, which I thought was good. TurboTax, friendly reminder. Even with Issa Rae, taxes are coming up. The Duracell ad was funny because with Tom Brady powering down in the middle of his broadcast was kind of funny. The Ram Trucks ad which was a play on the Three Little Bears, was cute. Glenn Powell is fine. FanDuel was fine. Skechers was boring. WeatherTech was campy, I suppose. The Pepsi challenge was very reminiscent of most Pepsi ads. Coors Light was fine. Oh, the Hellman's ad was redoing the fake orgasm scene from When Harry Met Sally, which was a lot of fun. This one, okay, so the Duncan ad, he is out at number 37. I would have ranked this way higher because it's funny, it's relatable, it's also deeply classist against Starbucks, which is really funny and entertaining. It was the only ad that I felt actually kind of sent a social message out of all of them, and I thought that was rather interesting. NerdWallet, uneventful. Little Caesars, uneventful. YouTube TV, uneventful. Meta, also uneventful. Lay's the Little Farmer. This girl grows her own potato to give to her dad. It was adorable. T-Mobile and Starlink. I'm actually eligible for Starlink, and I don't care. Uber Eats was fine. Fetch, quit trying to make Fetch happen, and that ad's not going to help it. The Salesforce ad was aired a couple times. It was funny. The GoDaddy ad, no one cares. Dove was cute. It was like about like body positivity. It was probably a little too woke for people. Instacart was funny. Pringles was funny because of the flying mustaches. Budweiser, they're really trying to get people back with Budweiser. Good luck with that. MSC Cruises, Liquid Death was fun. All the Booking.com ones have been funny because the Muppets are funny. And Taco Bell was fun. Oh, and the Jeep with Harrison Ford was fun. And the Mountain Dew Blah Blast. These ads have already been airing, so that we kind of already seen them. But Seal, the singer, as a seal, was entertaining. Disney Plus, no one cares. I didn't understand the Circul ad. It's like, it's a water bottle, who cares? Like, why would you spend money on a branded water bottle? Like, who cares? Coffee Mate, who cares? Reese's is fine. I don't know why we're advertising Reese's. Everyone's gonna buy it. We don't care. Totino's Pizza Rolls. That one was okay. Angel Soft was like, you should go to the bathroom now, which was kind of funny. At Hims, obviously, was there. So, yeah, that's all of them. I broadly agree with his rankings. I would have put the Dunkin' Donuts ad way higher, but that's just me. Should we get to some serious news? Let's do some serious news. And this gets into what I was talking about in the monologue, with a judge trying to slow down some of the stuff that the White House is getting up to. It says here, judge rules the White House failed to comply with court order. The federal judge in Rhode Island said the Trump administration has failed to comply with his order unfreezing billions of dollars in federal grants. It says here, a federal judge on Monday said the White House has defied his order to release billions of dollars in federal grants, marking the first time a judge has expressly declared that the Trump White House was disobeying a judicial mandate. The ruling by Judge John J. McConnell Jr. in Rhode Island federal court ordered Trump administration officials to comply with what he called the plain text of an edict he issued last month. Judge McConnell's ruling marked a step towards what could quickly evolve into a high-stakes showdown between the executive and judicial branches, a day after a social media post by Vice President J.D. Vance claimed that, quote, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power, unquote, elevating the chance that the White House could provoke a constitutional crisis. Already more than 40 lawsuits have been filed against the Trump administration, challenging Mr. Trump's brazen moves, which have included revoking birthright citizenship and giving Elon Musk's teams access to sensitive Treasury Department payment systems. Judges have already ruled that many of these executive actions may violate existing statute. Both Judge McConnell and a federal judge in Washington, D.C., had previously ordered the White House to unfreeze federal funds locked up by a memo from the White House Office of Management and Budget that demanded that billions of dollars in federal grants be held back until they were determined to comply with President Trump's priorities, including ideological litmus tests. On Friday, 22 Democratic attorneys general went to Judge McConnell to accuse the White House of failing to comply with his earlier order. The Justice Department responded in a filing on Sunday that money for clean energy projects as well as transportation infrastructure allocated to states by the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill was exempt from the initial order because it had been paused under a different memo than the one that prompted the lawsuit. Judge McConnell's ruling on Monday explicitly rejected that argument. His initial order, he wrote, was, quote, clear and unambiguous, and there were no impediments to the defendant's compliance with it. The judge granted the Attorney General's request for a, quote, motion for enforcement, essentially a nudge. It did not find that the Trump administration was in contempt of court or specify any penalties for failing to comply. However, the judge was straightforward in finding that a initial temporary restraining order that he issued on January 29th was not being followed. These pauses in funding violate the plain text of the TRO, Judge McConnell wrote. That earlier ruling ordered the administration to not pause, freeze, impede, block, cancel, or terminate money that had already been allocated by Congress to the states to pay for Medicaid, school lunches, low-income housing subsidies, and other essential services. The White House fired back almost immediately, predicting an eventual victory. Quote, each executive order will hold up in court because every action of the Trump-Vance administration is completely lawful, said Harrison Fields, a White House spokesman. Any legal challenge against it is nothing more than an attempt to undermine the will of the American people. Now that quote, right there, every autocrat, every dictator, every anyone who has sought power beyond that which is legally given to them in any governmental system has used that type of language. So when I talk about language a lot, because I'm a language guy. When you start hearing the language of autocracy, when you start hearing the language of dictatorship, pay attention, because this is the type of excuses that will be used to later on to justify a lot worse things than just controlling money. The will of the American people, as if our system allows for that type of direct democracy, which it certainly does not. And that they're just simply doing what people want them to do. And why should any course up that? That undermines the rule of law. And once you lose the rule of law, nothing else matters. Constitutions, rights, everything goes out the window. Nothing else matters. Any legal challenge against it is nothing more than an attempt to undermine the will of the American people. Take that home with you, folks. Now, bouncing off of controlling money, I want to bounce over to the thread from Adam Johnson on Twitter about Doge and finding abuse. Now, the interesting thing about everything that has kind of come out so far is that they haven't actually found any fraud, just things they don't like. And this thread kind of walks through that quickly. We'll read some passages. It says here, it's been 21 days. Don't reporters covering Doge still indulging, finding abuse frame, find it odd that Musk hasn't found a single case of actual fraud? All he does is screen cap random, wholly legal expenses he simply ideologically disagrees with and presents it as a major scandal. If a random internet troll did what Musk is doing, taking random screen caps of expenses out of context, calling every program he ideologically disagrees with a waste or fraud, he would be dismissed as a crank. Yet here we are still doing funding efficiencies reporting. My favorite part is when Musk and his legion of incel muckrakers screen cap already published, widely available data from databases created by sunshine law liberals and act like they stumbled onto a heretofore unknown conspiracy, a full-blown contagion of cynicism and stupidity. The savings thus far has come from haphazardly laying people off and gutting programs duly approved by Congress. That's how it works, right? You can just save 100% of the federal government by getting rid of all of it. Then this mystery money magically goes somewhere? Let's check in on how Musk's last attempt at finding efficiencies went. Just because slashing expenses magically reduces waste, right? What a coincidence. It's roughly the same reduction of humans in valuation. It's almost as if humans actually do things that create value. And then he posts 2 pictures. Elon Musk says he's cut about 80% of Twitter's staff. Unrelated, but important. Down 80%. Fidelity says X has plummeted in value since Elon Musk's takeover. And honestly, the first reply is indicative of what every Trump person has said. It doesn't matter if it's legal. What did I just talk about in losing the rule of law? This is what's so important. When you get to this point, it doesn't matter if it's legal. You have lost one of the foundational things that makes small r Republican democracy work. The American people have wanted that shit to end for decades, and it's happening. Sledgehammer time. And that's the first reply to this. And the fact that there are people, including people in my own life, that are willing to sacrifice the rule of law to get what they want, to just ruin everything, because it's all bad, it's all corrupt, it's all fraud, it's all this, it's all that, it's all the other thing. We're watching how a democracy falls apart in real time. And when the Democrats said this election was about democracy, they weren't wrong. And then the reality is they're and it's like the American people are a monolithic group. A modest amount of Americans wanted this. Half the country did not want any of this. And the fact that that, you know, this is literally the first reply and has 20 likes, 7 replies, and has been viewed 3.4 thousand times should tell you, I think, where we're at for at least half the country. And that should frighten you. That should frighten you a great deal. Now, moving right along. Oh, this is the tweet about judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. I saved this as a companion to the story about judges, and we don't have to go through it. Oh, here we go. So this is an interesting sort of thing. So, one of the kind of side things that Trump has been up to. I forgot to follow this person. One of the side things that Trump has been up to is he has appointed himself chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center. Now, why on earth would he want to do that? And this reporter asked the question, why would you want to be chairman of the Kennedy Center board? And Trump replies,
I'll be there until such time as it gets
chairman of the Kennedy Center board.
Because I want to make sure it runs properly. We don't need woke at the Kennedy Center. We don't need, some of the shows were terrible. They're a disgrace that they were even put on. So I'll be there until such time as it gets to be running right.
Have you seen any shows there? How do you know they're terrible?
I didn't go. No, I got reports it was so bad I didn't want to go. There was nothing I wanted to see. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's the reason I hung on to this is because here's the reality. Trump has always wanted, and we know this from the great stories from Mary Trump, Trump has always wanted the respect and validation and the elite status of people who travel in the circles where you become chairman of the Kennedy Center. And because he's a schmaltzy real estate developer from Queens, he has never, ever gotten to travel in those circles. No matter how famous he became on television, how much press he got, all this sort of thing, he never got into that world. And now he's forcing his way in. He is an enfant terrible, as the French would say, a terrible child, of just going in and smashing the doors open, all because some of the shows were terrible. But he's never seen any. And he's going to be in charge of it until things are fixed. It's pointless. This is speaking of the government funding, this is a really great thread on USAID. And I wanted to go through some of this because I read through this morning. He invited Caffeine and Read on, which I couldn't agree more. It was one of the interesting things about it people don't necessarily understand, and he goes through the process of when something like USAID gets budgeted, it's not because the organization decides what to spend its money on. It's actually by Congress. So step one, every year the White House puts together a federal budget proposal to Congress. Every federal agency sends OMB their budget wish list. OMB goes over everything and begins cutting down agency requests and reviewing them for alignment with the president's priorities. So to be clear, every dollar that USAID requests from Congress goes to the White House review. Not very slushy. Step two, congressional appropriations. And then it goes through Congress. And Congress writes the budget. Congress specifies to the dollar how much USAID spends on health, humanitarian aid, economic development, education, and so on. USAID annually sends us money based upon Congress's direction, and it must go back to Congress again with a further level of detail on how it will satisfy the various budget directives via congressional notifications. Congressional notifications, or CNs, inform four congressional committees on how USAID will spend its budget. Congress then can choose whether to clear or hold, and then once the Congress has cleared things, then USAID can start to program funds. To do so, it must follow a huge rule book on how this is done and how things are spent. And USAID funds are awarded to a partner organization to implement. And they put out detailed calls for proposals and select partners based on a points-based evaluation for all the proposals it receives. And then finally, the money goes out and makes an award. By this point, the money has been through 2 rounds of White House review, 2 rounds of congressional review, and navigated the federal acquisition regulations. And then there's also auditing of the partners, how the money was spent, all this type of thing. And the point of this whole thread, which goes on for a while, and I'm not even reading all of it, is that it's not like USAID is this secretive place where just money goes to die. That would be the Pentagon, actually, who can't pass an audit. His point is that USAID has to go through all of this approval and oversight with Congress and all of these things, and then its money and how much it gets and how it's supposed to be spent is determined by other people outside of the organization that then goes to partners who are themselves audited and have to meet requirements and all this sort of thing. There's so much openness about all of this stuff that doing, getting away with any sort of dishonesty or grift is actually incredibly difficult. Not impossible, because it is possible. You can always find a way or a loophole. Always. But it's an incredibly hard thing to do. And that's an important thing to remember. Because a lot of people get a lot of odd ideas about these programs. That it's just some people in a dark back alley room that just get to spend money willy-nilly with no oversight. And that's just not the case. And so to go with our other exploration of Doge and their inability to actually find waste and fraud and just get rid of stuff they don't like, and this being the will of the American people, this also goes to show what the actual process is, and it's a lot. There is so much government bureaucracy that goes into getting a single dollar out of the government that it's not even funny. and this I think sums it up really well. The truth is that USAID is one of the most heavily scrutinized agencies in the federal government, with layer upon layer of process controls, safeguards, and oversight mechanisms to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. Did USAID fund things under Biden that Trump doesn't like? Yes, and vice versa. That's a normal policy disagreement you see in any transition. But when Doge and Trump call USAID a rogue lefty slush fund, they're actually telling you how ignorant they are of how any of this stuff works. And it's it's a whole journey, but it's a very important one to understand that, yeah, can mistakes happen and things like that, but the reality is USAID is far from a lefty slush fund. I talked about this on the newsletter on Saturday, but I wanted to bring it up again. That's just not true, and you're going to hear it repeated over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. It's not true. Next story. This one, we're gonna stop here long. We're gonna cruise through this real quick. One of the things that happened over the break while I was gone, is Trump decided to ban some student member clubs at West Point. And those include the Asian Pacific Forum, the Contemporary Culture Affairs, Corbin, Japanese Forum, Korean American Relations, Latin Cultural, National Society of Black Engineers, Native American Heritage Forum, Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers, Society of Women Engineers, Spectrum, and the Vietnamese American Cadet Association. And this person pointed out that the German Language Club, the West Point French Forum, and the West Point Polish Club were not eliminated. And he asks us to point out the difference. And one of them is that those things tend to have to do with white people. And a lot of this other stuff tends to do with non-white people. So, and the first, the comment section kind of shits on him for trying to say it's about a white people thing. And it isn't really, and the, sort of thing, but it is interesting that all of, anything to do with a non-white ethnicity, although a couple of these we don't know, like Corbin, Forum, and Spectrum, we don't know what those are. Anything with a non-white person or a woman, Society of Women Engineers, has gotten canned, but these things have not. The fact that Trump is spending time worrying about student clubs at West Point is its own problem. Probably something Hegseth came up with. But, and I don't want to stay here long, but this is emblematic of, especially within the military, the vast changes happening under the Trump administration. I had a brief conversation with Mikey Weinstein from the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, and I don't know how he's sleeping at night right now with the amount of issues happening in the military, the changes that are happening. Today they ordered every trans person off of HRT in the military. They're just being deluged with calls, emails, all this type of thing, trying to get help for people in the military trying to navigate this new administration. So our military is being radically changed, and people will say, that's good, it's getting de-wokeified and improved and all this sort of thing. And, okay, if getting rid of the checks notes, Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers is de-wokifying, or the Asian Pacific Forum Club, I guess this is what the American people voted for. This story I saved. So this story was kind of a hot thing last week when I was out of town. I saved the story because it was kind of the story seen round the world. And this picture obviously is now, hugely iconic. And has been shared around on social media a million times. And it's titled very aptly, The Cruel Kids Table, among the young, confident, and casually cruel Trumpers who, after conquering Washington, have their sights set on America. And I'm not going to go through the whole article. It's long. It's long. It goes on for a while. And there's been a lot of, dialogue, and they interview different people and all this type of thing. And the end, I think, is kind of interesting. On my last night, I got to smoking with a model type in a fur coat with a vaguely European accent. I later discover she's married to an alt-right activist with ties to white nationalists. How can one country be so entertaining? America's just made of something different, she said to me. Everything became so puritanical. I nodded my head in agreement. The next morning, I woke up sick. The whole point of this article is that, Gen Z, as young generations go, is much more conservative than millennials were, all this type of thing. A lot of Gen X people blame it on Gen X parenting. I would tend to agree. This is what happens when you have a generation of slackers who decide to have children. This is the result. And the fact that, the whole idea of, being conservative is cool again, traditional gender values, getting back to the real America, all this type of thing, is kind of it reminds me of what happened in the 80s with the people that came in with Reagan, or in the 90s people that came in with Newt Gingrich and everything. It's that same energy. The other thing that I think is also interesting about this photo is literally there is one, maybe two, three people of color in the whole photo. Well, four. There's that guy up there. Four. That's actually not too shabby. Even if we dump him, we're still back down to three. Three, possibly four people of color in the whole photo. It is very clear, kind of based upon this, who's back in charge. And this gets into my whole thing that I've talked about with, the death of the white Christian heteronormative narrative and extinction burst and all the stuff that we've been talking about today. This article kind of was the beginning of all of that. And they talk about, the people who listen to Rogan and all of this, all these people who found themselves sort of adrift in, this world of wokeness and leftism and all this type of thing. And they talk about, all the ways in which new media has, conquered the country for Trump. And if you haven't read this article, I suggest you do so. I found it as an interesting kind of peek into the curtain and into the world of the new and future elite. And I think the one big takeaway from this, I would say, is this ain't going nowhere. Trump will die someday. This ain't going nowhere. Vance is a millennial. He's only 42. And these kids are 20 years younger than him. This whole MAGA thing isn't going anywhere. Even if we have elections in 2028, which I'm not convinced we will. Even if we proceed on with some facsimile of small R Republican democracy, the reality is this isn't going anywhere. These people want their country back. And I don't know if we're going to be able to stop them. And we are going to be subject to their rule for a very long time. And that should give us all a great deal of pause. I want to talk about this story because I've been saving it for forever. I've been saving it for 3 weeks and I haven't talked about it. I want to dash through a couple other things first. One is this post from Mike Lee about using letters of marque, basically legalized pirate, in order to attack the cartels. Letters of marque were used to authorize certain individuals with, on an independent basis to perform acts of piracy, with the payment that they could keep any money or fortune that they found. They're authorized by the Constitution, and he's arguing that we should give out letters of marque to organizations like black military contractors, all this type of thing, in order to get rid of the cartels in Mexico. And rather than invading with U.S. troops, we should really give mercenaries and others the opportunity to go and, without legal repercussion in the United States, be able to go and take care of the cartels themselves with whatever success that they may or may not have, with letters of marque. Again, one of the crazy things that we now have to live with in the Trump administration, just putting it out there. Bit of a FYI, found this in the pbs.org this morning. Um, the U.S. is facing the most intense flu season in the last 15 years. And also H1N1 is being transferred from birds to humans, birds to cats, and possibly also human to human. It says here that one indicator of flu activity is the percentage of doctor office visits driven by flu-like symptoms. Last week, that number was clearly higher than the peak of any winter flu season since 2009-2010, according to the data posted Friday by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Of course, other viral infections can be mistaken for flu, but COVID-19 appears to be on the decline, according to hospital data and to CDC modeling projections. Available data also suggests another respiratory illness, RSV, has been fading. The flu has forced schools to shut down in some states. The Godly Independent School District, a 3,200 student system near Fort Worth, Texas, last week closed for 3 days after 650 students and 60 staff were out Tuesday. Jeff Meador, a district spokesperson, called it the worst flu season he could remember. So far this season, the CDC estimates there have been at least 24 million flu illnesses, 310,000 hospitalizations, and 13,000 deaths, including at least 57 children. Traditionally, flu season peaks around February. Overall, 43 states reported high or very high flu activity last week. Flu was the most intense in the South, Southwest, and Western states. The CDC declined to let an Associated Press reporter speak to an agency flu expert about the upswing. The Trump administration ordered a temporary pause on health agency communications and has continued to refuse interview requests that were routinely granted in the past, which should frighten you. But just FYI, flu is going around, other stuff is going around. If you are a person who might want to consider a mask, all this type of thing, I know for my own self, I will probably be masking in public if I go into the public or anything. The other story, and this one I found today as well, is just kind of sad. And we're going to go over, I know it's almost 8 o'clock, but we're going to go over, I have a recording at 9 o'clock anyway, so I'm not missing anything by not going over. So I want to dive into this a little bit. It's from the March 2025 issue of The Atlantic, and it's about how progressives froze the American dream. Something for the Trump supporter. Let's discover together. The idea that people should be able to choose their own communities instead of being stuck where they're born is a distinctly American innovation. It is the foundation for the country's prosperity and democracy, but it may just be America's most profound contribution to the world. No society has ever been as mobile as the United States once was. No society has even come close. In the 19th century, the heyday of American mobility, roughly a third of all Americans changed addresses each year. European visitors were astonished and more than slightly appalled. The American, quote, is devoured with a passion for locomotion, the French writer Michel Chevalier observed in 1835. He cannot stay in one place. Americans move far more often over longer distances and to greater advantage than did people in the lands from which they'd come. They understood this as the key to their national character, the thing that made their country distinctive. We are a migratory people, and we flourish best when we make an occasional change of base, one 19th century newspaper explained. We have cut loose from the old styles of human vegetation, the former method of sticking like an oyster to one spot through numberless succeeding generations or another. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, as 2 world wars passed, as the baby boom began, Americans kept on moving. And as Americans moved around, they moved up. They broke away from stultifying social hierarchies, depleted farmland, declining towns, dead-end jobs. If the first move didn't work out, they could always see a more promising destination beckoning them onward. These ceaseless migrations shaped a new way of thinking. When the mobility of population was always so great, the historian Becker observed, the strange face, the odd speech, the curious custom of dress, and the unaccustomed religious faith ceased to be a matter of comment or concern. And as diverse peoples learned to live alongside one another, the possibilities of pluralism opened. The term stranger, in other lands synonymous with enemy, instead Becker wrote, became a common form of friendly salutation. In a nation where people are forever arriving and departing, a newcomer can seem less like a threat and more like a welcome addition. Howdy, stranger. Entrepreneurship, innovation, growth, social equality, the most appealing features of the young republic all trace back to the single foundational fact. Americans were always looking ahead to their next beginning, always seeking to move up by moving on. But over the past 50 years, this engine of American opportunity has stopped working. Americans have become less likely to move from one state to another, or to move within a state, or even to switch at residences within a city. In the 1960s, about 1 out of every 5 Americans moved in any given year, down from 1 in 3 in the 19th century, but a frenetic rate nonetheless. In 2023, however, only 1 in 13 Americans moved. The sharp decline in geographic mobility is the single most important social change of the past half century, although other shifts have attracted far more attention. In the same span, fewer Americans have started new businesses, and fewer Americans have switched jobs. From 1985 to 2014, the share of people who became entrepreneurs fell by half. More Americans are ending up worse off than their parents. In 1970, and about 8 out of every 10 young adults could expect to earn more than their parents. By the turn of the century, that was only true of half. Church membership is down by a third since 1970, as is the share of Americans who socialize several times a week. Membership in any kind of group is down by half. The birth rate keeps falling. And although half of Americans used to think most people could be trusted, only a third think the same. These facts now form a depressingly familiar litany. They are often regarded as a disparate phenomena of mysterious origins, but each of them can be traced, at least in part, to the loss of mobility. Now, this article goes on for quite a bit. I read the whole thing this morning, but I liked the beginning because it kind of sets the scene for the whole situation. And this, and it basically gets into housing policy. That's the kind of the big thing is housing policy. And this quote really stands out. Americans once tended to look at houses the way Americans today look at cars or iPhones. Consumer goods to be enjoyed until the next model came within reach. But now that houses are a big economic mobility item themselves, and they cost so much, if people can buy, they tend not to want to leave. Or they're going to want to put down roots somewhere and not go because you lose equity, and that can be the difference between retiring or not. And so this idea of mobility, I had noticed that mobility was way down, that people tended to stay put. They're not moving as much anymore, and I brought it up on the show and in the newsletter. But the fact that this, this long article is being devoted to the fact that we're just not, we're not developing the same way, we're not growing in the same way, and that means people aren't moving for new opportunities the same way, is quite interesting. And this part is interesting. Jacobs, this family that decided to tear down a storefront. Jacobs' book marked a shift in American attitudes, where civic boosters once sketched fantastical visions of future development, competing to lure migrants their way. By the 1960s, they had begun to hunker down and focus on preserving what they had against the threat of what the architectural critic Lewis Mumford called the disease of growth. State legislatures had authorized local governments to regulate land use at the beginning of the 20th century, but now activists pressed for even more local control, for what the writer Calvin Trillin has called neighborhoodism. They were justifiably concerned that their unrestrained growth was degrading the environment, displacing residents, and leveling historic structures. More than that, they were revolting against the power of big government and big business, and trying to restore a focus on the public interest. They demanded that permitting processes consider more fully the consequences of growth, mandating an increasing number of reviews, hearings, and reports. And obviously, this is, this is all part of a conversation on housing and zoning and neighborhood character and why it's so hard to build anything. And so if you're concerned with housing policy, this article is great. It's in the Atlantic. It's this is good. Mobility is what made this country prosperous and pluralistic. Now progressives are destroying the very force that produced the values they claim to cherish. And obviously this gets into Jane Jacobs and all this sort of thing. And like I said, this article goes on. Giving Americans the freedom to live where they want requires tolerating the choices made by others, even if we think the buildings they erect are tasteless. Tastes evolve, as do neighborhoods. The point of the article, and this has gone on for a while, and I'm gonna stop. The point of the article is, if we want to have the America that we grew up with, we have to be able to build and allow new people to move in, and for neighborhoods to cycle, and for things to get torn down, built up, and to have that engine of growth once again. And it says here, these three principles, consistency, tolerance, and abundance, can help restore American mobility. Federal guidelines can make the environment more amenable, but the solutions by and large cannot come from central planning. States and cities and towns will need to reform their rules and processes to allow the housing supply to grow where people want to build. The goal of policymakers in any case shouldn't be to move Americans to any particular place or any particular style of living. They should instead aim to make it easier for Americans to move wherever they would like, to make it equally easy to build wherever Americans' hopes and desires alight. That would return agency to people, allowing them to pursue opportunity wherever they might find it and to choose the housing that works best for them. For some, that might mean reviving faded towns. For others, it might mean planting new ones. Whatever level of education they have attained, whatever city or region they happen to have been born in, whatever occupation they pursue, individuals, janitors, and attorneys alike should be able to make their own choices. The genius of the American system was never that its leaders knew what was coming next, but rather that they allowed individual people to decide things for themselves so they might collectively make the future. That is a lot hyper-individualistic, more so than I would like, but I get the spirit of it. And housing policy and building policy definitely prioritizes existing residents and existing people over new residents and new people, and it has caused a terrible housing crunch in this country that is quite unbearable. I mean, we didn't build housing after the GFC. We are a third behind the number of houses that we should have. There's a lot of cities that want to grow. There's a lot of denser housing that is possible, and cities are just not allowed to do it. Or not necessarily allowed to do it. There is so much bureaucratic inertia that developers who even want to take on those projects, it costs simply too much because of all those permitting processes and public opinion and all this sort of thing that clogs up the system. You can't just go and build anymore. And that has sort of stultified the American growth engine. And it's tied to mobility. If there's a new city going up, a new town going up, a new growth happening someplace, people can move there, find opportunity. That's not happening, and therefore people aren't moving, and they're trying to make the best of what they have, where they have, because the cost of housing is just simply too much. And houses have become a form of wealth, rather than just simply a form of a place to live, a consumer good. And that also has had a tremendous effect on how we think about housing, how we buy and purchase housing, and where we choose to live. The last story I'm going to do, and then we're going to get out of here, has to do with the live event I did last Thursday. So, for those that pay attention and have liked and subscribed and all this type of thing, you will be aware that I did a video with Jesse Hirsch and David Beckmeyer on Thursday about leftist podcasting, the left's influence on the new media, and why the right has taken over so much. In this article from Bloomberg that kind of did the rounds, and it was actually published in late January. That's how long ago this came out. Now, how long I've been sitting on it because it's long and we haven't gotten to it, but we're gonna do it now. It gets into this at a deep level at how podcasters like Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, and Logan Paul are mobilizing America's men to lean right. An analysis of over 2,000 videos shows. And it says, in an effort to understand the media diet of a generation, Bloomberg watched and analyzed over 2,000 videos from 9 prominent YouTubers, and these are them. Reporters reviewed nearly 1,300 hours of footage from their channels, mapped out the podcasters' guest networks, and quantified the frequency of key political messages that they had distributed to tens of millions of subscribers each day. To hear them tell it, America is in a desperate place, destabilized by soaring inflation, migrants streaming across the border, and the beginnings of a third world war. Gender politics have gotten out of hand while schools and the medical establishment dupe the public. The same messages were communicated in Trump's inaugural address on Monday, because this was put out right after the election. Now that Trump is back in power, the broadcasters are well positioned to help build support for his political agenda, transforming grievances into policy that could have lasting effects beyond Trump's term in office. In the months leading up to the election, hosts had more politicians and pundits on their shows and discussed the issues more frequently. Of the broadcasters' videos that reached over 1 million views on YouTube during the time span Bloomberg reviewed, more than a third of videos mentioned voting or the U.S. elections, often with the host explicitly calling on listeners to vote. 37 highly viewed videos mentioned voting or elections. That would be all of these. None of the broadcasters style themselves as political pundits, and their conservative talking points were sandwiched between freewheeling discussions of sports, masculinity, internet culture, gambling, and pranks, making the rhetoric more palatable to an apolitical audience. Still, their popularity is sparking, quote, a very big sea change in terms of who are the voices that matter. Mark Zuckerberg, Meta Platform's chief executive officer, said in a conversation with Rogan published January 10th. There's this wholesale generational shift in who are the people that are being listened to. And I want to, because this is long and I'm not going to have time to get through all of it, there's a couple main points that I want to get to. And that is the types of guests they're having on and the way that these shows aren't actually necessarily political. And this is especially true for Logan Paul with Impulsive, Flagrant with Schultz, who's a comedian and invites on a lot of comedians, the Sean Ryan Show, PBD. Lex Friedman, I think, is the only one here who's probably explicitly political, maybe in PBD. And so it is interesting how, you see a lot of influencers, athletes, which makes sense there. In terms of this stuff is just kind of a presumed sort of thing. It's very casual, just like, oh yeah, like this is what the common person believes in, sort of thing. It says here that Trump's appearances drew significant viewership across the shows. His interviews were in the number one episodes by view count for the majority of the programs tracked by Bloomberg in the past 2 years. Altogether, the 9 episodes of Trump as a guest drew more than 100 million views. Trump's personality and history are compatible with the program's messaging on masculinity, according to Alice Morwick, Director of Research at the Data and Society Research Institute. It's like, don't be ashamed of your base, manly desires. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty. Don't let anyone take you down, she said. You should be proud and strong, and you should also go after the people criticizing you. And they have clips here and everything. 30% of top guests are politicians or pundits. And so they look at all these views, the number of channels, and who they're having on, and all these different politicians going into these apolitical spaces and talking about politics, not in a way that is overt, like not like this show where we do politics all the time, but in a very sort of covert way. And one of the things they point out, and this one is actually really good, most did not have any political guests until the election, so they all sort of ramped up. And we see this especially with PBD, who does a lot of politics, but also Joe Rogan. We see this a little bit with Lex Friedman, although we had some earlier in the year. And we also see this with Theo Vaughn, I think the one who has the least amount of political guests at all is Logan Paul, because he just had Trump on, and that was it. And then the other one was voting in elections. The other one was mentioning war, the transgender issue, and a lot of talk about healthcare, especially like in social medicine coming out of the pandemic, the economy, which gets a lot of play, and immigration, which gets a lot of play, especially around the election. If you notice, early in 2022, these things aren't talked about as much. As you get to the election, these things all ramp up. And it is kind of, if you want to go read this whole thing, it's on Bloomberg. It's called YouTube. It's called The Second Trump Presidency, brought to you by YouTubers. And I think the most interesting thing about all of this stuff, and then we're going to go. The most interesting stuff about all of this stuff is these shows are not necessarily overtly political. It's all very subtle, but they talk about this stuff in a way that just sort of makes sense. Like, of course, this is what it is, and here's, a headline that you may have heard about or seen on social media, whatever have you. And hey, isn't that crazy? Doesn't that not make any sense? Isn't that just weird? Isn't that just weird? And I would say the ain't that just weird voted hard. I remember in August, I was talking with some friends about how this was the election of the influencer. And I think the reality is, obviously, like, the median voter is not a political or a news junkie like I am, or like all my friends are, all this type of thing. And so they're only hearing stuff here and there from time to time, whatever have you. And they are, just, engaging with a very surface level area of stuff, and it's oftentimes happening on these shows that aren't terribly political but are driving a singular message. And it's funny because I'm reminded of the poll that showed People that understood what was going on tended to vote for Kamala, and people that did not understand what was going on tended to vote for Trump. And I find that it is a bit, I think, difficult to get into these spaces, onto these spaces, all this type of thing, because you have to sort of be able to play their game and their framing, which is very hard for the left to do and for leftists to do. Although there are some people that are good at it, like Waltz and Pete Buttigieg and some others, and I do it pretty well myself, but I'm a little bit small for all that stuff. But it was very interesting to watch sort of a analysis of what the message was, when it was played, why it was played, by who, and it just, again, it was this subtle political messaging that was not overt. It was not like old AM talk radio. It was just kind of these bros just being like, yeah, man, things have gotten weird, and it, and then as the election increases and as the messaging increases, there it goes. And Kamala caught a lot of flack for not going into these spaces, and I think she should have. I think she should have been on every podcast she could get on. And all of her surrogates should have too. That's where the political conversation is happening. And I think that's perhaps the biggest takeaway, is the political conversation is happening in these communities. It's happening online. It's not happening in the spaces we're used to seeing it happen at. And that is certainly a lesson for the future. All right. I have 45 minutes left to do a recording, also talking about politics. So I'm going to go sign off for the night. My name is Cameron Lee Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to keep up with me on socials, head over to CameronJournal.com. It's at Cameron Journal on Instagram and Twitter, Cameron L. Cowan on Facebook, and at Cameron Journal on TikTok. And like I said, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure to go sign up for the newsletter, go sign up for a Cameron Journal Plus membership, and support this channel. Like, subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do on the platform you're doing it on. And make sure to be notified. I'll be back to you next Monday with another edition of the Cameron Journal Newshour. The interview this week, Dina Hodges is talking about her grandfather, Charles Solch, the creator of Peanuts Today. That one is out right now. And Friday, we're talking about relationships with Mario Wisa. So, I will see you guys next week, and newsletter on Saturday. Talk soon, everyone. Bye-bye.